For years, in the quiet woods of Michigan, a man lived a rather ordinary life. A life filled with family, friends, work, the day-to-day things you and I both know so well. But there was something else. Something he couldn't quite forget. You see, this man had seen something. Not in a movie, not in a dream, but with his own eyes. Something tall. Something massive. Something covered in hair. Is something that, if he told most people, would earn him laughter instead of belief. So he kept it quiet. For a while. But that sighting, that sound, those moments when he knew he wasn't alone in the Michigan woods, they stayed with him. They nagged at him. Until one day he decided silence wasn't enough. Instead of hiding it away, he turned on a camera, he opened a microphone, and he began to talk. First a little, then a lot, about Bigfoot, about cryptids, about the paranormal, and about anyone else out there who had seen what the rest of the world said wasn't real. And do you know what happened? People listened. They listened because they too had stories. Stories of ghosts in their homes, lights in their skies, creatures in their backyards. People who were laughed at too, but with him, they weren't laughed at anymore. He became something else. A host, an interviewer, a storyteller. Now, he wasn't just a man who once saw a giant in the trees. 3 live shows a week. A podcast, Brunch with Bigfoot, and hundreds of videos, thousands of listeners. Thousands who no longer felt so alone. And when the lights go on in his Michigan studio, when the camera shines, another guest calls in from another corner of the world, he's no longer just a witness. He is the voice for all those who whisper, "I've seen it too." So today, when you hear a man from Michigan speaking boldly about Bigfoot, about UFOs, about ghosts, about mysteries the world isn't ready to explain, you remember that it all began not with fame, not with microphones, not with an audience, but with one man standing quietly in the woods, looking at something the world says doesn't exist. And now you know the beginning of the story. It belongs to a man known as Bigfoot Michigan Rob.
Hello, one and all. It is me, Bigfoot Michigan Rob. This is Brunch with Bigfoot Michigan Rob. Of course, I'm your host, BMR. Thanks to everybody for coming on in. I don't have Monica for today's show. She has the day off, which gave me an opportunity to go through some of these emails that I've gotten from folks. And I pulled up and found a couple Bigfoot paranormal-ish type of encounters that I went through this morning. So I decided to take that time today with Monica being off and present them to you guys tonight or this afternoon. You know how it rolls. I say tonight, I'm on in the afternoon, the evening, and late at night with 3 shows a week. Tuesday nights with Krista, 9 o'clock. Beyond BMR, Thursday afternoons with Monica, 1 o'clock, Brunch with Bigfoot Rob. And of course, our Saturday night show, late night with all the gals, Krista, Brandy, and Monica. We do a show on Saturday, as most of you already know. Thanks for coming in once again. If you're new here, please subscribe to Bigfoot Michigan Rob on YouTube, the Blondes and the Booze Paranormal Podcast on YouTube. And by the way, everybody, they've got a new show I think is debuting tonight. 4 blondes, 1 mystery at a time. Go check them out, and that will take you up to their other show, the Blondes and the Booze Paranormal Podcast. Also subscribe to Texas Front Porch, Paranormal Paul, Donnie Cho Says Stuff, and of course, Truth or Tinfoil. thanks for that. Don't forget, I do want to thank everybody, as I always do, for buying my books. Bigfoot and Michigan Rob presents True Cryptid Encounters. Book 1 and Book 2 both found on Amazon. If you bought it, thanks so much. Please leave a review. It's all analytics these days. It does help promote book sales. So I do appreciate that, much like YouTube. And on YouTube, give me a like, hit that like button, comment after the show. So thanks for that. And you, mateys, don't forget, you can become BMR Pirates. Arr, mateys. Join the many, join the few, depending on your point of view, as I always say. Thanks for that. You get a picture of good old BMR in the chat room sporting a bandana. Thank you for that. And of course, the super chat is always open. I appreciate that. It helps support the show and what we do around here. Donations certainly not expected, but always appreciated. So thank you so much for that, everybody. We got about 20 people in here right now, really quickly. Diane Boss, Gary Spikes, Pops, Crystal J. Hey, CJ, how are you? Good to see you. Wedge, hello, Wedge. Good to see you. Mickey G, as always. Thank you. Scotty M. Scott M. Yeah, it's sunny here, Scotty. It's about 58 degrees. So, yeah, a few others, those that are speaking in chat, they pull up here. Poncho Zorch. Hello, Poncho. Love Poncho. Chris Driggins. Hi, Chris. Thanks for coming on in. A few others as you come on in. So thank you for that. Appreciate you guys. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited about the Blonde's new show coming out tonight. Go check them out. Subscribe. I think they about like 62 or 3 subscribers for the new show. That's Krista Brandy, Natalie Smearman, and Mary Lynn Bast. Yeah, check them out. This should be a fun show. So thanks to everybody. I've got a big month of October lined up for you guys with a lot of cool guests, as well as November is starting to click in already. So don't forget to turn on your alert bells. Hi, Rags. How are you? Good to see you. So I appreciate y'all for coming in. And so as I mentioned, good opportunity to share a couple encounter stories I've gotten, some emails. I haven't done an encounter story show in a while, so this is a good opportunity. Hello, Michelle Wilfong. How are you? Thanks to everybody for coming on in. So yeah, and these are kind of there's both of these encounters I've gotten. They're similar yet different. It walks the line between the spirit world, the paranormal world, and it's involves 2 sets of different groups for 2 separate encounters for you guys. And I'm going to get on with it. Again, hit that like button. And thank you so much for coming in. So this first one that I'm going to share with you folks is it's about a father and his son. The son's name is Davy, and the father's name is Lance. And as I was perusing through this email, I said, wow, this is quite fascinating. I think you guys are going to enjoy this. So excuse me. So anyway, when I'm reading through this, this Davy, who sent me the email, says, hey, Rob, my name is Davy, and his father's name is Lance. And he goes on to tell me that when he was around the age of 8 or 9 years old, his father, Lance, started to tell him stories about creatures in the woods. And most specifically, you guys, it was about Bigfoot. Hi, Roger. And he goes on to tell me that this takes place in eastern Ohio. And Davey went on to say that he always thought that his dad was just telling a good yarn, like most fathers like to do with their children. My father always told me great yarns, spooky stories, and he thought that's pretty much what it was. And it was always about how his father, Lance, saw Bigfoot at least 3 times during about a 5-year span. It was always, he says that Rob was always when my dad was camping, and it was roughly about 6 miles from their home. And he went on to tell me that his dad's stories were not very scary, but he always found them compelling. Compelling about how his father has seen a man or humanoid covered in hair with extreme girth and strength. Hello, Patty. Around the age of 13, Davy's dad, Lance, took him to the camping area, the very same camping area where he had to come across these and had these experiences with an alleged Bigfoot. And his father went on to tell Davy that, I'm not going to make you any promises that we're going to see the hairy man, but he feared it'd be some great bonding time with his son, his first time out in the woods. And he said, bear in mind, Davy, if we come across something, this is about something that is not really supposed to exist. And if it wanted to show itself, as it did 5 times or 3 times in 5 years, I believe I said, it would. So they take off. So on the very day that they go camping in the woods, Davies is with his dad, of course. And then Rob, he says to me, boom, within a half hour, we saw it. We saw something. But he says, however, Rob, that this Bigfoot, alleged Bigfoot, or whatever this was, wasn't very happy about Davy being with his father, Lance, because Lance, the father, had always been by himself. Hi, Roger. And this was the first time that he brought somebody else into this camping site. So Robbie goes on. The trip with my dad really changed everything in his mind that he knew about monsters. As he says, legends and things that live just out of our sight, right? So as he continues on with the story, hello, Earlson, how are you? So he goes on to say, we set up our camp along a ridge that overlooked a narrow creek bed. The same area that his dad said he had seen the Bigfoot before. He says, Rob, if he tries to describe the area a little bit, he says the woods were thick with oak and hemlock. And he says the woods seemed to like swallow all sound. He says the air smelled like damp moss and iron, even during the daytime when the sun was kind of drying out some of the forest. He says he found it unusual, however, that even during the day that there were shadows, and he seemed to think that these shadows lingered much too long. So now I'm getting into this as I'm reading on, this guy's email. He says the day starts out, his dad was in very good spirits. He was telling jokes to his son, Davy, as they gathered wood and they set up the tents. But every now and then, though, Davy says to me, I'd catch my father glancing toward the tree line. He was very quiet, his father was, almost like he was listening for something. Robbie goes on, later that night, after we roasted hot dogs and sat by the fire, He says, Rob, was kind of unusual. And we've all heard this before, everybody. We've all heard this before. He says the forest went silent, eerily silent. Hello, Mr. G. He says there's no crickets, no sounds of the frogs, which were apparent. And he says they couldn't even hear the bustling of the leaves through the wind, as was somewhat of a breezy day. His dad was about to say something to his son when all of a sudden he says, Rob, my dad kind of froze mid-sentence. And then he looked to me and he says, Davy, don't move. Hi, Patty. So Davy goes on to say, at first, I thought he was just trying to spook me. But then it came this smell. He says, Rob, it was a rank, musty odor like wet dog mixed with rotting meat. Davy says, Rob, my eyes started to water. Hello, Sunny. Sunny's awesome. Go check out her vlog. My Sunny 11, I believe. I can barely read the chat. My eyes are going bad, you guys. I got to see an eye doctor. Then he says, then we heard it. It was a heavy snap of a branch at first, maybe 50 yards out. Then another. But this snap of the branches and the twigs were getting closer. Says, Rob, the sound of something big walking on two legs. He says, my dad, Lance, his hand went down for his flashlight, but he did not turn it on. He just said, it's him. Before I could ask who, he says, Rob, this thing stepped into view at the edge of the firelight. He says, Rob, this thing was enormous, 8 feet tall at least. Shoulders like a bear, but standing upright. He says the body was covered in dark, matted hair, and its chest heaved with slow, heavy breaths. He says in the firelight, it caught its eyes. They were deep in an amber color, glowing. It's almost like they were reflecting the fear that Davy was experiencing at this moment. Rob, my dad stood up slowly, he says, whispering, it's okay, Davy. I've seen him before. Hi, Genocide. Just stay calm. But he says, Rob, this creature itself wasn't very calm. It let out a low guttural growl that vibrated through his chest. Now, as I was reading that, you guys, kind of resonates with me with what I experienced, right? I felt that vibration myself. Then he says, Rob, it bared his teeth. Human-shaped teeth, but massive. Almost like squared off. He says, Rob, it took a step toward us. He says his dad raised his hand as if he was trying to show peace toward this alleged Bigfoot. But then he says, Rob, this thing roared. And again, I resonate. You guys heard my story before. There's a lot of similarities, right? He says, Rob, it was a sound so deep that it rattled the tent poles of course, their tent. Rob, my dad shouted, go to the truck, Davy, now. Jason Finch, hi. He says that he ran. He did not look back until he was halfway to the truck. When he did, he saw his dad standing his ground, flashlight in one hand, the other still raised as in peace, right? And this creature was only a few feet from him. Then he says, Rob, this creature, this Bigfoot, whatever you want to call this, he says, man, it did something I'll never forget. He said it slammed its fists into the ground and it howled. Another resonating point with me, you guys. Not like a man, however, not like any animal he's ever heard, but something you can't describe it, Rob. He says maybe ancient, but it had fury. It was not happy. Rob, the ground trembled. At least I thought it appeared to me that it trembled. And he says, Rob, just as quickly as it turned, it vanished into the trees with a thunder of breaking branches. Rob, my dad came to the truck minutes later. He was pale and he was shaking. He didn't speak for a long time, as he says. Finally, his dad says to Davy, I think I got the impression that this Bigfoot didn't want you here. He says he got this impression somehow, and he doesn't know where, but he got this impression he never wanted anyone else to see him but the Father Lance. Rob, we drove home in silence. We never camped there again. So, this is Davey that emailed me this story, this encounter. He says years later, when he was all grown up and his dad had passed, he went back to that same ridge, that same area of Ohio. He says, Rob, I don't even know why. Maybe he says to prove to me or to myself that it was real. Rob, he goes on, I swear to you, just as the sun went down, the forest, like many years ago, went silent again. He says, Rob, the same smell filled the air. The same smell filled the air. Is that what I said? Well, I'm in such deep thought right now. He said he heard that same low rumbling growl, followed by a single heavy footstep. He says, Rob, I did not stay to see what came next. He says, but I will tell you this. Whatever lives out there in those woods of Ohio, it remembers me. Now, we're going on further in this story as he says, now, Rob, it was almost another 20 years since the night with my father and this other experience. He says, now I'm again much older and I've grown much harder with my outlook on Bigfoot and life in general. But he was never able to feel or shake that feeling that he had. Especially the way the creature had looked at him and not wanting him there with his dad. He says it was something about this thing, this experience, it knew something. And this is what nagged this guy. So he says, when I found myself back in those same Ohio hills, older, and again without his dad, He told himself it was just to pay his respects one last time. He says, Rob, you know what, though? That was kind of a lie. He goes, I had to go back because I needed to know further. I needed to know why it detested me, why it just wanted to see my father now long past. He needed to know, as he says, he needed to know if it was still there. He says, Rob, the forest hadn't changed much since the previous 2 trips. The same darkness that strangled the light, he says. He says there was the same creek that rushed through the ravine. Everything was the same air. He says it was still heavy with that smell of earth and pine. Things that he'll never forget. He always will remember. Rob, I set up camp on the ridge. Same area, as always. Again, it was quiet. No birds, no crickets, nothing. Just the slow creeping wind through the trees, very eerily, as he goes on to say. He says, Rob, then it started again. That feeling. The weight of eyes is on this guy. He says his flashlight flickered once, then it died. It went out on him. He says he just froze. Because he looks out and he can sense out in the tree line something was moving. It was moving very slow. It was moving very careful. And it was moving very intentionally. Then, Rob, again, then came that smell. That same rank, musty rot, as he goes on. He goes, I turned toward it. He says, there it was. Standing at the edge of the firelight. The same creature. He says, Rob, though, it had the same hulking shape. But he says, Rob, it appeared older somehow. He says, the hair was streaked with gray. He says, it seemed like the eyes were deeper. He says, Rob, I know this sounds weird to say, but he says those eyes seem very sourly, sourful, as if, it was, grieving not seeing his father for the last 20 years. And he says, Rob, and all of a sudden this happens. He says, this thing speaks. He says, Rob, it speaks not in words, not out loud, but thoughts went straight to my mind, he says to me. Hello, Hexus. Thanks to everybody for coming on in. I love you guys. Hit that thumbs up. He says, Rob, it wasn't language that he was experiencing in his mind now, but it was more like images or memories, flashes. He says, in these images, Rob, I was scared. He says, I was enthralled. I didn't know I had a mixed bag of feelings, because in these images that he assumes this Bigfoot, right, is projecting onto him, he sees his father in these images. He says his father is younger, standing where he had stood all those years prior, unafraid. And then he says, Rob, in these images, there was an image of me as a small boy, and I was trembling, staring up at the creature. Much like, again, in the past, right? Then all of a sudden, these images turn to fire, smoke, trees burning, all along the same ridgeline, but being torn up, broken and ruined, he says. Anger and fear. These are the emotions this kid, not a kid anymore, he's a grown man now. That's what he was experiencing. Hey, Randy. I think Randy's in here. And then he says the image has changed now. He says now he sees himself seeing the prior images. This is his older father and him as a younger boy. But now he says these projected images during this entire encounter, this experience, he says he sees himself now older as he is now, standing. He says, I got this feeling that I returned to a spot where I did not belong, or where this Bigfoot, this creature, whatever, this being, didn't want him there in the first place from the prior years. And then he says, Rob, I had this single unmistakable vision of myself, Davey, lying face down in the dirt, cold and very still, he says. And the creature was again alone in the darkness. Rob, during this experience, I fell to my knees, weeping. He says, my skull was pounding. He says, my head wanted to just explode like I had a terrible migraine. Through the noise in his mind, in his head, these images, he felt that he got this feeling that he got what he wanted, this Bigfoot, this entity wanted him to know. And this was what he felt, that this thing, again, much like the previous years, wanted him to leave. He was interfering. Almost like Davey was never meant to see this thing or go there again. He says, finally, the pressure and the pain in my skull and my head subsided just enough for him to open his eyes. This young Davey, or this older Davey now, right? He says the Bigfoot was closer now. He says, Rob, it's not 10 feet away from me. He says his breath, you could see the breath fogged out in the night's air, right? He said those eyes were deep, they are amber. And again, he says they appeared to be ancient, something from long ago. And he says those eyes locked in on mine. Then he says, Rob, one last image flashed through my mind. And it was the image of his father smiling at him, waving goodbye to him as he disappeared into the trees along with this creature. Rob, that's when I understood. My father had a connection with this Bigfoot, and it was for him and him alone to see. He feels his father made a mistake bringing him there, and this Bigfoot, this Sasquatch, was kind of reinforcing that. He says, again, the creature took the slow step back, and another melted in the forest with the image of his father. He says, all of a sudden, the crickets, the wind, everything, all the sounds of the forest returned once again. He says, Rob, I packed up what little I had and left, and I never looked back. He says, but sometimes at night, when I close my eyes, I still see those visions, the warning, that final message burnt into his brain. Rob, he says, I swear, Some nights when the wind comes down from those Ohio hills, he says he can still hear him and his father echoing, whispering, not with words, but with that same deep knowing in his head that he was never wanted there. Wow. Literally, wow. So this story starts out with the father, had experienced this Bigfoot about three to five times. I don't remember, in a 5 to 10 year period. Told these stories to his son Davy. Then thought it was time to take Davy and embark on the search for what his father's experienced. Has the experience. This Bigfoot didn't take kindly to it and kind of let the father and Davy know. Then years later, as Davy's an adult, after his father passes away, he needs answers. He goes into the forest and he got those images of his father. And he got that feeling that he wasn't wanted, but at the same time, he wasn't, from what I gather anyways, not terrified, not that he was in danger, but got the distinct feeling to not go back. In further correspondence with this fellow, he has not gone back, does not got to. He's got his answers. He feels relieved, got some closure with his father. But I tell you what, it's kind of weird every now and again to hear his father's voice and those same images. I don't think I'd want that anymore. I think after this experience will be enough for me. Hopefully for this guy, that it doesn't continue on, with the hauntings of the father, hauntings of the past, hauntings of the experience. I thought that was a really cool. Really cool. I really did. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. I've got another one to share with you guys in a minute. I have to step away for a brief 30 seconds. Don't go nowhere. Hit that like button in the meantime. I'll be back in less than 90 seconds. BMR. Okay, I'm back. I had to grab me another water here. When you talk like that for so long, you just get parched. Thanks to everybody for coming in. Love you guys. Hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new. Don't forget the Blondes tonight with their new show. 4 Blondes, one mystery at a time. Of course, subscribe across all our affiliates. Tex, Monica, Paranormal Paul, Randy, Truth or Tinfoil, Donnie Show. So, this next one, you guys, is pretty weird. I think it's got a lot of spiritual and paranormal elements to it. I found it very fascinating and intriguing. Hope you guys do as well. Don't forget the super chats are open. You too can become BMR Pirates, our mateys. Join the many, join the few. Thanks to you all. Hey, there's Randy. Truth or Tinfoil. Go check him out. Subscribe to his channel. So yeah, I'm gonna get on with this last one. And thanks to everybody for coming on in. So I was reading through this and I said, wow, this is very this is different. I'm not so sure that maybe this was a Sasquatch. It's the guy goes on to tell me it's a group of researchers, and it's a band of researchers, as he calls them. He says they call themselves the Ridge Walkers. Kind of cool. And so as the story unfolds here, this encounters story. I always say story, you guys, but they're encounters. You know, some people say, Rob, why are you saying stories? Encounters are stories, right? Alleged stories. So that's the way I roll. So anyway, this a group of 3 or 4 folks. They call themselves, as I said earlier, the Ridge Walkers. And they go, hey, Rob, we're just a ragtag team of Sasquatch researchers. And they said they spent years chasing these stories that they've heard on the internet, on YouTube, this, that, and the other. But where these folks are based is somewhere out in the Appalachians, right? And if I recall, the group of these folks, there was the leader of this group, I guess his name was Cal. He was an older guy. And he's had decades of field work behind him. And there was another lady, her name was Mia, who she basically was a folklorist who believed the old tales of all these cryptids and everything else. And she says that with folklore, there's a lot of truth behind folklore than people want to admit. And then their other guy that they had was a very skeptical guy. I think his name was Travis. And he was like their cameraman, video guy, this, that, and the other. So, Rob, as the story goes on, it says it was late autumn in 2022. So this is kind of recent. And so what they were doing is they put together on the database, they were from other various websites, and they were following these reports of deep resonant howls, right, that towered and were heard in the remote stretch of the Ohio River in the Appalachians, the Ohio River Valley, I should say. And they did some research, and there was a lot of old legends out there about Sasquatch and all the paranormal activity. And so as they're out in the community, the locals of the community had warned them not to stray near the ridge of the Ohio Valley, this certain section. I forget which section. It's so vast, right? But don't go there too much past sundown, especially this area that they were to conduct some research. And it was very odd because the town folk had made mention that the forest itself, you guys, didn't take kindly to outsiders. Okay. Hey, Barb. So, again, as they're out there in 2022, the first sign that something was different came when this young Mia, the folklorist, found this mound, okay, out on the trail. She says, I guess, excuse me. He says that this mound wasn't very large. It was just a rounded rise covered in roots and moss. And he says it was kind of half swallowed and taken over by the forest. She says the air, the wind, it kind of hummed. She goes, there's no other way to explain it, but it just kind of hummed. So during these three folks on this investigation, exploration, whatever words you want to use, when they're doing this at this mound, they've started brushing away the soil. And then as they're brushing away and doing their investigations of the soil, they found carved stones. And beneath these carved stones, they found like spiritual motifs, animal figures, and a faint outline in this motif was that of a great, sizable, upright creature. Not a lot of definition to this creature. Okay. Could tell it was like humanoid looking, but there's not a lot of descriptive information to give to me on this. And then they also uncovered this crude symbol, something like a handprint crossed by an arrow. Hello, unexplained evolving cryptids. I can't see everybody in the chat, as when I'm solo, I don't really pay a lot of attention. I appreciate each and every single one of you coming on in. If you're new, please subscribe, hit that like button. So anyway, again, back to what I was saying, they come across this crude symbol, something like a handprint crossed by an arrow. Mia says to her group that it's a burial. They were on a burial mound, right? And then she went on to say some of the First Nations could have been the Shawnee, is what she was seeing, incorporating from these figures. And then, as they're out there in this area at this burial mound, something like a low tremor rolled beneath their boots. They can feel a tremor, almost like a minimal earthquake, as they described to me in this email. And again, you guys, much like all these encounters, we all have heard these, not only from me, but other shows you watch, podcasts, whatever. Again, you guys, there's always this data. Again, everything grows quiet. You know, you can't get away from the forest growing quiet, can you? It's almost incorporated in many of these encounters. Nothing. There's no sound. Dead silence. So going on. They decided that night that they were going to put their campsite beside the mound. So they're setting shop, their campsite, at this mound. Not so sure I would do that. You know, I don't know. So Mia telling the story says that their friend Cal, I think it was, when this guy woke up, he sees this soft blue light threading through the trees. And at first, I guess this Cal thought it was some sort of mist. But he says it moved with intent, it moved with some sort of intent and some purpose, and is weaving about the tents. Around the tents, excuse me. So he woke up the rest of his crew that he's with. And then, much like the last story, I mean, this is so crazy. Another strong scent, musty, damp soil. But unlike the last story where that smell came about them, in the last story, if you recall, it was the thunderous roar of a creature. He said this was not at all a creature when they heard this sound at a distance. It was the sound of a distant drum beat. A drum beat, you guys. Then from the mist of that evening, that night, a shape began to take form. The shape was massive. Taller than any man, this Mia is telling me. It had broad shoulders, long furred arms. Could tell it was furred because it kind of shimmered. And it kind of shimmered like smoke. The face was shadowed. Not descriptive. But the eyes, they glowed like a light green. Mia whispers to the group, "This is the guardian spirit." She said that the elders spoke of it. The watcher, everybody, of the mound. Then, a sudden wail. As she's saying, there was suddenly this wailing sound. A horrible, inhuman cry echoed from the darkness. And this is separate now, you guys. You got to bear in mind, this is separate from this figure, this shadow being that they're seeing, or this outline perhaps of a Sasquatch. This is something different. This is a wail of something off, right? Then there was another sound, and this is getting closer to the campsite. Now, all these other shapes are moving between the trees. They were thin, twisted shapes running about. And unlike the green of this alleged Sasquatch, these entities had glowing red eyes. And the shadows were very ominous, right? Very sketchy. And they got this dark feeling. These three people got this dark feeling. Not like the creature that they've seen prior, that is still there, by the way. Rob, she says, the light from the mound brightened. And now the figure, I believe, of the Sasquatch has stepped forward. And its presence shook the ground again. Rob, it seemed like the air or this energy, it seemed like there was all of a sudden we were encompassed with this heavy energy. And he says, and this creature raises one massive arm. And as it raises this massive arm, those shadows or shadow people with the red eyes, they seem to retreat. Like this arm let off this unseen force. And they propelled themselves and they got out of Dodge and disappeared back into the forest. The blue light that I mentioned earlier, it kind of flared brighter. And again, these entities started shrieking. And they went back into the blackness, of course, of the woods. Rob, when it was over, the silence was more apparent, a deafening silence, if that makes sense. And he says, what she says, this guardian that lifted this arm, presumably a Sasquatch, turned toward these three people. She says it was in that moment each of them saw something. Much like the last story, that's why I did two of these at the same time, because they are very similar. This entity, the Sasquatch, flashed images through their head. And it was about forests being burned, mounds being destroyed, right? And they got the sense that they were in an ancient land, a land that had been forgotten. Then it faded away. As they were in this email, she utilized the word guardian more so than Sasquatch. The guardian looked toward the horizon and it dissolved back into the mist. But it's kind of cool, you guys, when this guardian, as she's explaining, It dissolved back into the mist, back into the mound. The mound went silent. And as they looked at the soil, at the mound, the carvings were gone that I mentioned earlier. It's almost like they were covered by a fresh layer of soil. So this group, they packed up their things and they left. They got out of Dodge, right? They're gone. As they hiked out, they still had this feeling that they were being watched by the guardian of the forest, like it was helping them get back to where they needed to go. Moving forward, this Mia in the email continues on and tells me that it had been 6 months since they left that Appalachian Ridge in the Ohio Valley. Now, during this time, this group of people, they all started having very similar dreams. They all kept dreaming of the blue light, those red-eyed, shadowy figures, and also that of the so-called guardian or the spiritual Sasquatch, which eradicated these beings from the forest. They all felt that the forest, 6 months later, was calling back to them. Hey, Andy. Hello to everybody that came on in. I can't see everybody. I appreciate you guys. So again, they all feel that the forest is calling back to them. And in their dreams, they also are experiencing those same drums. You remember the drums that I mentioned? Everything, they kept dreaming this over and over in their minds, and they want to get rid of this. So it was late spring coming up, and they could not resist anymore. They've got to get back, and they need closure. They got to close this chapter because, quite frankly, these dreams and the wonder, the mystery was just getting to all three of them. So they all meet at this small diner, as I remember from the email, and they put together a plan of action to go back. And they all agreed that this would be the last time that they would go back, and hopefully it would end their dreams and put this to rest. Moving on, as they go back, they reached the ridge. It was dusk. It was 2 days after having their meeting at the diner. They said the forest seemed different. The path they'd cut months before to get to that mound was overgrown. When they reached the site, the mound wasn't how they had left it. Because when they left, they just packed up their stuff, they went, but the mound seemed different. They said, Rob, let's see what I remember. The earth had risen higher as if it had grown. So the vines and all the shrubbery, everything else, the brush, it covered a lot more of the area. But it was weird because I remember she was telling me that the weirdest thing is that there was these different flowers, luminescent flowers, and they all took on this bluish glow, much like they experienced prior, but now they were in a flower form. As the night fell, the drumming began. So back come the drums on this next, exploration, right? It was not as distant as the first time, though. However, it was a lot closer, and it was circling them. And then the blue mist from the blooms of the flowers seemed to disperse into the woods, dancing about in the tree line. That scent came back from the prior time. Rob, they go on. All of a sudden, the same guardian, the same Sasquatch, the protector of the woods, the figure that got rid of the red eyes, black shadowy folks or figures, took its form again. This time, it's much clearer to their vision. It looked spiritual, but it took on a more physical presence. The eyes glowed green. Then, without words, again, the visions came. Mia says in this email that the visions told a story. In all three of their minds, they were getting this, right? This communication. The story of this Mia goes on to tell me, he says it seemed like it was the story of warriors fighting off the red-eyed shadow people of their land. However, the fight was futile because they were up against something not human, but paranormal. The guardian, as they were speaking on, or the spiritual Sasquatch, was the only thing to protect them from their land. The three of them felt that the land was free of the entities, but this land was not intent for human interaction. The three of them felt a sense of relief, and they never returned. I thought that was very interesting, you guys. There's a lot of parallels here with ancient mounds, tainted land. It seems like they did experience a spiritual Sasquatch, which they call the guardian of the land. What about these black shadow people with the red eyes? It seemed like when these three of these people went on this journey, it seemed as though that, again, much like the first story, they weren't really wanted. And what happened was these shadow people appeared. But I think because the guardian of the forest, the Sasquatch, if you will, it showed itself and it protected these people from maybe peril, right? Maybe from something far more nefarious. So, and we get these stories about First Nations people and how a lot of them believe that Sasquatch is a protector of the forest. The Sasquatch looks out for the benefit of their tribal unit. And I think that maybe it was overlooking this land. And for whatever the reason, the intentions of this group spurred on these red-eyed black shadow people. And I think that this Sasquatch figure, I think that it helped them because I've come across, as much of you have heard too, Sasquatch is revered as the protector of the land. And I think that in most of these forests, when you walk in the forest, you guys, I do know this is fact, lots of these forests are tainted and they're protected. The question is, what's protecting them? Is it Sasquatch? We even hear stories of a dogman being a protector. Most of our dogman accounts that we come across are not as protectors, but of doers of wrong, right? I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I thought it was cool. Monica had the day off, so I just got these couple emails that I want to unveil with you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. So that's where we're going to end it today. Don't forget to check out the Blinds and the Booze, or I'm back to back tonight. Hit the like button, subscribe here if you're new. Today is Thursday. I'll be back Saturday night with the Late Show with Krista, Monica, and Brandy. So you guys turn on those alert bells, give a thumbs up. Appreciate you guys. Y'all rock. With that being said, I want you to enjoy the rest of your weekend. I am, of course, BMR, Bigfoot Michigan Rob. Have a fantastic rest of the week. BMR, I'm out.